organically occurring communications as clearly as possible. I mean, it's not as clearly as seamlessly as possible, I guess.
It is very interesting on the. I was listening to you and thinking whether it is more about infrastructure or about platform, and well, probably the answer is that it is both.
Mm-hmm.
But probably it is the answer to the first question where I asked what is the difference between them, because there are some elements of what you have named as infrastructure included here, and also the platform. Yeah, it's a great case to describe it. But
yeah, so I think the key thing for me is that infrastructure studies for me is a method. So this question, what does it depend on? And these companies depend on harvesting your information. And even in the example I just gave, they need the like button, because the like button helps them separate information for filtering. So it's a matter of what depends on what. So this is what I find valuable about that approach. And it helps me understand the evolution of the system. So in Facebook, to continue with Facebook as an example, they've added a system where you can express a mood and tag a status update with a mood. So you can say, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad. And this is an emoji, but it's not an emoji that appears inside the status update. It is like a tag that appears outside the status update, like a button. And again, I think people see this as maybe Facebook trying to be cute or funny, or providing some other button to click on because it's fun. But it's purely explained by the fact that the current state of emotion detection in text by machines is not that good. And so we will greatly improve Facebook's ability to detect emotion if we tag some posts with emotions, because then Facebook knows that these kinds of texts have this emotional valence, and it can learn from this association. So asking, what depends on what is a helpful heuristic for me. But again, I don't see this as conflicting with platform studies. It seems quite consistent with what they would say too.
Yeah, and it's very interesting due to also the development of the corporations. But let me probably come back to the locality issue, and this will be my last question. Or probably, Leona, do you have also some questions now? Before we move to the very last questions.
You had one question about infrastructure that I was excited about answering. So I'd love to answer that. I don't have the questions in front of me.
Sorry, I'll.
You had one question about infrastructure. Infrastructure that I was excited about answering, but I don't remember the question.
About infrastructure and infrastructure, yeah. Yeah. Could you tell about it a bit more?
Sure. So, I mean, I was excited by that question because this is an argument I've been making that I wish had more, that I wish circulated more. I think is an interesting idea. So I've been arguing that the internet is the infrastructure. So is a prefix that means proto or first or original or in some way ideal. And that's obviously strange because the internet is the newest infrastructure. It's not like roads or something, like it's the newest. So why would I call it the infrastructure? Because I'm calling it first. But I think that it's the infrastructure of neoliberalism. It's the infrastructure that other infrastructures want to be in the neoliberal ideology, because the internet is something that has evolved to be mostly financed via private sources, to be mostly unregulated. The actual operation of the internet is managed by consortia of private companies through technical organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's managed by non-governmental organizations. In the same context, in another infrastructure, you would have a governmental organization, but the internet has non-governmental organizations. And it has at times extremely a relationship with national boundaries that doesn't correspond to other infrastructures. So the internet has important networks at the backbone that aren't particularly associated with one country, where with other infrastructures we thought about the infrastructure as extending to the border of the nation and then stopping, and then another infrastructure starting on the other side of the border. And so I think one of the things I like about this way of thinking is that it's about the movement of all infrastructure and about capital and about neoliberalism. So I think that when I look at the news and I see developments in other infrastructures, like now it's unfashionable to call them smart cities, but this was the movement that was called smart cities a few years ago. But the idea is to make all infrastructures more like the internet. So how can we privatize? How can we change things from governmental to non-governmental? How can we allow a more fluid relationship that allows capital a transnational reach that is not impeded by borders? So this is very much inspired by the Graham and Marvin idea of splintering infrastructure, which is now quite old. But I think it's the next version of it is more specific, is to say that all infrastructures want to be the internet in some way.
Does it mean that after the internet, the infrastructures change somehow? I mean that if I mean,
yeah, I think so, because after the internet, so in some ways, network computation is what enables a lot of the features we associate with smart infrastructure. And so what happens is that the infrastructure of the internet was itself built on top of, say, the telephone networks, and to some extent even the road networks, the rail networks. So that's the way the internet came to be. But at the same time, now the internet is itself the substructure for the other infrastructures. So for example, here the exciting things in urban technology and infrastructure are really about the use of widespread sensing and networked information to control things like water and traffic, or maybe things like surveillance, and all of this runs on top of the internet. So the internet was itself at the top, and now it's at the bottom, where it is the substrate that the other infrastructures depend on. For example, there's a water tower near me that I can almost see from that window. And the big movement in water management is to add network connectivity to water towers so that they can report their level, and the sensor can express their situation. So I think it's fascinating that such an old infrastructure is now depending on what was new. So it's a reversal of what was old is new and new is old. And then I like the idea of the infrastructure because I feel like there is a desire among capital to copy the way that the internet works. And sometimes this is fetishized as calling the internet dynamic or adaptive, even though it is not particularly. But the idea that, it's plastic, and that it's the idea of the network structure is obviously central to all infrastructure, including, as I said, roads and water and things of that sort. But now they believe that the future of all systems is like an internet system. So anyway, I guess it's a good time to be in internet studies.
Thank you. Probably one last question then is just very, very close to what you have told now. I remember your article about people playing with the internet, which I like very much. Actually.
I'm so happy that you found that article. I also remember it fondly.
Good. And what is interesting there, maybe what was my angle of reading it, is the idea of meeting two understandings of what is the internet, from people who use it and people who create some digital divide programs, etc. And here, when you talk about, for example, comparison with water infrastructure, I wonder what, because it is rather clear what people try to control when they control water. And when they, let's say, control internet, I mean, all of them, just users or people who are in some in Facebook, or people who are developing their cities. I mean, the mayor and some city ministry, so on. Their understandings of what they develop or control are different. And that is also, we have a research about this, about the difference of understandings of what is the internet. So I wonder whether you probably had thought or seen in your research some conflicts or clashes of different understandings of the infrastructure, and the conflicts or controversies, which might be helpful to understand where is the conflict inspiration, and a question also to understand who is left out, or I mean to find that turn to the research.
Yeah, so I mean, I think